episode here at YASHAV Ministries. Thank you for being here again in our study for the Torah portion, or the portion of the biblical study for the week. If you like the content that we have on our channel, like, subscribe, share with any youth that is willing to listen to the teachings and be interested in understand the Word of God in its context and its legality, right? We have to understand the Bible is a legal document, right? It's not a book of stories, which is made believe by others, or a book of or a religious book. It is a legal document, right? It establishes God's order. It establishes God's heart and how He wants us, His creation, to live according to Him, right? And so this week's Torah portion is the Torah portion Eikev, right? Which is as a result to or because, right? And it starts in chapter 7, verse 12. It says, "Then it will happen, as a result of your listening to the ordinances, when you keep and do them, that Adonai your God will keep with you the covenant kindness that He has sworn to your fathers. He will love you, bless you, and multiply you. He will also bless the fruit of your womb and the produce of your soil, your grain, your wine, your oil, the increase of your herds, your young flock, and in the land that He swore to your fathers to give you. From all peoples you will be blessed. There will not be male or female barren among you or your livestock. Adonai will remove all sickness from you, and He will not inflict on you any of these terrible diseases of Egypt that you knew, but will inflict them on all who hate you." Right? So here it starts as a result, right? Eikev, of your listening to these ordinances and keeping them and do them, right? That is the main point. And then he says, Adonai your God will keep with you His covenant, right, of kindness that He swore to your father. He will love you and multiply you, right? So He will bless you based on you listening to Him and keeping His word and His commandments and doing them, right? And He establishes what they were going to do behind Elohim. He says, "You will devour all these people Adonai your God will give over to you. Your eye is not to pity them. You're not to serve their gods, for that will be a snare to you. Suppose you say in your heart, these nations are more numerous than I. How can I drive them out? You're not to be afraid of them. You're to be sure to remember what Adonai your Elohim did to Pharaoh and to all Egypt. The great trials that your eyes saw, the signs and wonders, the mighty hand and outstretched arm by which Adonai your God brought you out. So will Adonai your God do to all the people who..." Right? And so Elohim is reminding them that of the incident with the 12 spies, right? Where the 12 spies decided that they were afraid of the might and the giants of the land, and they said that they didn't want to enter the land because those people that were in the land were too big for them or were too strong, right? And they were forgetting that Elohim had delivered them from the giants of Egypt, right? He took them out of the land of bondage. And so he says, "Moreover, Adonai your God will send the hornet against them until the survivors and those in hidden perish before you. You shall not be terrified of them, since Adonai your God is in your midst, a great and awesome God. Adonai your God will drive away those nations before you little by little, and you will not be able to put an end to them all at once, or else the beasts of the field will multiply on you. But Adonai your God will give them over to you, and He will throw them into great confusion until they are destroyed. He will hand over their kings to you, and you will blot out their name from under the heavens. No man will stand up to you until you have destroyed them all. The carved images of their gods you are to burn with fire. You are to not covet the silver or gold on them and take for yourself, or you could be snared by it. For it is an abomination to your God, Adonai. You are not to bring an abomination into your house, for you, like it, will be banned thing. You must utterly detest and utterly abhor it, for it is a set apart for destruction." So here Elohim is stating who is the protector and what they're going to do when they enter the promised land, right? And so last week I had established uh, the the legality of Elohim's covenant with the people, right? And so I established that the the book of Deuteronomy is based on a Caesarean vassal treaty, right? And to review, right, a Caesarean vassal treaty is between two unequal parties, right? The more powerful party is the Caesarean, which is God, and the less powerful is the vassal, us, right? Sometimes parties, right, in the ancient Near East, right, in the ancient Near Eastern context, in the moment that Israel is in the desert and in Egypt, right, the legal aspect of the communities around Israel is based on this, right? And they used to refer to each other either as father and son, lord or servant, or king and vassal, right? Lesser parties must show submission to the Caesarean, right? So the Caesarean, right, is a covenant regulation between a great one, right, and one of his subject kings. The great king claimed absolute right of sovereignty and demanded total loyalty and service, while the vassal must love his Caesarean, right? And love wasn't the filial love that we know of, or the feeling is based on loyalty and faithfulness, right? Your word means everything to Elohim, like I've said before. You have to be truth to what you say and what you pledge to believe, right? And the vassal, right, like I said, it pledges absolute loyalty to his Caesarean and whatever service his Caesarean demands, right? Whatever your God commands, you are to be exclusively and show your reliance on God and his protections, right? And he will protect you, right? And in the communication, again, that they will use is the Caesarean will be father or Lord, and the vassal is servant or son, right? And that's not based on the titles that we have today, is based on legal terms, right? And so in this book that I have here, I'm going to show you. In this book that I have here, that Pastor Gabriel recommended me to read, it says it's the Treaty of the Great King, right? The covenant structure of Deuteronomy. And so this author, right, Meredith Klein, is establishing the legality of the book of Deuteronomy, right? The structure in the historic time, right, based on the Hittite, the Egyptian Empire, all these empires that are surrounding Israel right now are based on these moral and legal aspects, right? And so the author of this book demonstrates to us that there is a legality to the book of Deuteronomy and a structure, right? And so here he says, most interest in the beginning of the book of Deuteronomy, right, in the beginning chapters, is the fact that the pattern of suzerainty and a treaty can be traced in miniature in the revelation written in the two tablets by the finger of God, right? So he says that a suzerain treaty can be traced based on the evidence and the communication of God. We can see that culturally is based on a suzerainty treaty, right? And the Torah is written by the finger of God. It is not Moses' Torah, right? And I say that because many people say that, the Torah is Moses. No, Moses is the messenger. He's the deliverer on behalf of God, but the Torah is God's, right? And so God, Elohim, starts off, I am the Lord thy God, right? And this opening words are from the Sinaitic proclamation on Exodus chapter 20, verse 2. And it corresponds to the preamble, right? Which the preamble is part of the structure of the Caesarean treaties. And it identifies the Caesarean being God or the great king, right? And in terms, it's supposed to inspire awe and fear, right? And so the author of this book gives us an example of the Hittite tablets in one of the Hittite treaties between the god Mursilis with his vassal Dubi Tusuk of Amru. And he begins like this. It says, these are the words of the son Mursilis, the great king, the king of the Hittite land, the valiant, the favorite, the storm god, the son of pilumas, right? It says that such treaties continue in an I-thou style with a historical prologue, right? So the preamble and the prologue are structures, right? You do the preamble, I am thy God, I am the great one, I am the king. And the prologue is basically surveys the relationship, right, and the special benefactions to that vassal king. In the treaty just referred to, right, the Marsilis Treaty, Marsilis reminds Deut of the vassal status of his father, grandfather, and his loyalty and enjoyment, right, of Marsilis. And so here, Marsilis, the god in this Achati land, right, he is reminding Deut of his loyalty to the fathers and the grandfathers of Deut, Tesu, right? And so here he does a comparison to the Ten Commandments, right? In the Decalogues or the Ten Commandments, right? The historical prologue is found in the further words of the Lord, which he brought thee out of the land of Egypt and out of the house of bondage, right? So that is Elohim's prologue, right? So his preamble is, I am the Lord thy God. I am Yehovah, or Yod He Vav He, or I'm Adonai thy God. So there he establishes who he is. And then the prologue, he establishes what he has done, right? And so then he says the two other standard features of classical Caesarean treaties were the invocation of the gods of the Caesarean in the Hittite sphere and the gods of the vassal as witnesses to the oath, and the pronunciation of the imprecations and benedictions which the oath deities were to execute according to the vassal's deserts, right? Obviously, in our belief based on the biblical story, right, God's covenant with Israel, there cannot be no other God or a third party as a divine witness, right? So anything that was implicated in the Ten Commandments, Israel's oath was to be sworn only by God, the creator of everything, right? And heaven and earth, and heaven and earth will be witnesses to this covenant. Not because heaven and earth have any power individually, but because God controls them, right? And Yahweh is the sole provider, sole controller of everything and everything, sole creator, all right? And so here this author is presenting to us the legal and covenantal structure, right? So this is a map of the Hittite kingdom, and it's to the north of Israel, to the Euphrates, and so it says the best preserved of all Caesarean treaties from the ancient Near East are the Hittite treaties, right? And so now, last week I talked about the two stone tablets, and so the two stone copies were part of those ancient Caesarean and vassal establishments. It is common to make two copies, sorry for my typos, one for the Caesarean and one for the vassal, right? And so it served as a evidence and as a witness as well of God's word, right? And it held not only us accountable, but it held Elohim accountable, right? Elohim said, I am thy God, I am the powerful one, I have done this, this, and this. If you follow my commandments, I will protect you, I will bless you, I'll keep you, right? And so Elohim, right, legally is saying, if you hold yourself to my words, I'll hold myself to my words as well, and I'll protect you, right? And so it shows how Elohim is righteous and is just. And so this is in the book of Deuteronomy, this is the how the structure of the book mirrors a Caesarean and vassal treaty, right? It has the preamble, chapter 1. It has a historical prologue, right, from chapters 1 verse 6 to chapters 4 verse 49, right? And then right now we are in the middle of stipulations of the covenant life, right? So last week we understood the great commandment, Shema Israel, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Elohim is one, right? And we understood the structure of the Ten Commandments and how they represent the unity between God and our connection to our brother and to our neighbors, right? As a community, we're called to be holy and to consecrate ourselves and to be faithful to him, right? And so Elohim has established who he is and what he is about. Now, I keep saying covenant everywhere, right? And so what is covenant? What was the definition or a legal or a just definition to covenant, right? Is a binding agreement or a contract law. Is an agreement in writing under seal as to pay a stated annual sum to a charity, which that's where the tithes comes in, right? A particular clause in which an agreement, ESP in a lease, right? In early English law, an action in which damages were sought for breach of a sealed agreement, right? And the Bible is God's promises to the Israelites and their commitment to worship Him alone. So that is what the covenant is, right? So our faith is based on Him, right? And in our willingness to listen, obey, and apply His commandments, He will fulfill His duty as to protect us and bless us, right? And so the book of the covenant at Sinai produced and promulgated a program of conquest, right? They had to exterminate the Canaanites, right, and their cult, right? And Elohim says, "Thou shalt utterly destroy them. Thou shalt make no covenant with them, nor show mercy unto them," right? And we go back to what the author of the book of the Treaty of the Great King says after the preamble, in the prologue, it follows up as "I thou," right? And so he is a if then, right? If you do this, then I do this. If you don't do this, then I won't do this, right? And here Elohim is telling Israel, you have to destroy them, right? You should destroy their pillars, and you should have no mercy on them. Why? Because the Canaanites, right, used to sacrifice their babies to their gods, right? They used to do many horrible things in worship, right, to their gods. And so they had already established in how do you say that? They had contaminated the land, right? And Elohim didn't want to associate himself with that kind of worship and that kind of people, right? And so Elohim is telling them, do not associate yourself with how they do things. You're supposed to eliminate the thought of worshiping me the way they worship their God, which was sacrificing babies and having group, how do you say it, sexual cults, right? And so Elohim is trying to establish that He is not to be worshipped that way. And so here, He's not to be worshipped that way. So here, we're going to see now in chapters 8, right? Chapter 8, Deuteronomy chapter 8. Here, Elohim is going to remind Israel of who is the provider, right? And He's going to remind them of the bread. He says, you are to take care to do the whole mitzvah that I am commanding you, right? The commandments. So that you may live and multiply and go and possess the land that I swore to your father. So again, by obeying Elohim, then He will multiply you and you will possess the goodness of the land, right? You are to remember all the way that Adonai your God has led you these 40 years in the wilderness in order to humble you, to test you, and to know that was in your heart, whether you will keep His mitzvahs or not. He afflicted you and let you hunger. Then He fed you manna, which neither you or your fathers had known, in order to make you understand that man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of Adonai. So, it's interesting because Yeshua said this, right? When He was being tested in the wilderness by Satan, Yeshua says, right, Satan tells him, turn this rock into bread or into manna, right? And Yeshua says, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes out of the mouth of Elohim. Where did He get this from? The Torah, right? So it shows us how Yeshua followed the Torah and understood what God wanted, right? And so it says, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes out of the mouth of Elohim. Neither did your clothing wear out on you, nor did your foot swell these 40 years. Now you know in your heart that as a man disciplines his sons, so Adonai your God disciplines you. So you are to keep the mitzvot of Adonai your God, to walk in his ways and fear him. For Adonai your God is bringing you into the good land, a land of withers with water, of springs and fountains flowing out of the valleys and hills, a land of wheat and barley, vines, figs, and pomegranates, a land of olive oil and honey, a land where you will eat bread with no poverty, where you will lack nothing, a land whose stones are iron, and out of those hills you can dig copper. So you will eat and be full, and you will be blessed. Right? Adonai will bless them. And he has given you the land. Take care that you do not forget your God by not keeping his mitzvot. Okay, so by you not keeping the mitzvot, that means that you, right, the commandments, you are forgetting that Adonai, your God, is the one doing all these things. Right? So it says, take care to not forget Adonai, your God, by not keeping his mitzvot, ordinances, statutes that I am commanding you today. Otherwise, when you have eaten and are full, and have built good houses and lived in them, and when your herds and flocks multiply, and silver and gold multiplies for you, and all that is yours multiplies, then your heart will be haughty, and you will forget Adonai your God. He brought you out of the land of Egypt from the house of slavery. He led you through the great wilderness, the terrible wilderness, the fiery serpents, scorpions, and thirsty ground where there was no water. He brought forth water from the flinty rock. He fed you in the wilderness with manna that your fathers did not know, in order to afflict you and test you, to do the good in the end. You may say in your heart, my power and the might of my hand has made me this wealth. Rather, you are to remember that Adonai your God, for it is he who gives power to make wealth, in order to establish his covenant that he swore to your fathers, as it is this day. Now, if you do forget Adonai your God, and go after the gods and serve them and worship them, I solemnly warn you today that you will certainly perish, like the nations Adonai makes perish before you. So you will perish, since you will not listen to the voice of your God. Right? So now, legally, he says, I solemnly swear to you. Right? So he's stating his legal stand on disobedience. Right? And so this is a common that can happen, right? Especially in our times today, right? By us getting distracted, right? Because many of us start obeying God, and it's mainly, sadly, we come to God when we're struggling, right? And so when we're struggling, we understand that we have to obey the commandments, and so we start going to Shabbat all the time. We start, going to the feast all the time, and then in your obedience, little by little, you start seeing that Elohim is blessing you. And then once you start doing good, you get confident and you get comfortable. And then you start saying, oh, I'm tired today, so I'm not going to go and congregate. Or I'm not going to study the Torah today. Or I'm not going to receive the Sabbath. I'm just going to sleep, right? And so there's not a commandment on how you should be receiving the Sabbath, or there's not a commandment on the details of it, but it is important to follow the blueprint that has been established, right? Because it aligns with the importance of the Sabbath, which means to keep it holy, right? And so you attending the Sabbath in obedience and faith shows that you depend on Elohim. You don't depend on your own might, right? Right? When you break the Sabbath or break the feast to work and make yourself the money, that means that you are depending on your hand and on your might. Now, obviously, there's people that, like nurses, doctors, firefighters, right, military men that are in the job of preserving life, right? And to be understood, there is an understanding that because you're preserving life, you're not put in a position of breaking the covenant. But if you can keep the Sabbath as a preserver of life, you have to. You should, if your faith is based on the God of Israel. But if you're not one that works preserving life, then your sole dependentness should be on the faith you possess, right? Which is to the God of Isaac, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, right? To the God of Joshua, to the God of Moses. Okay, so your obedience is established by the actions of your obedience. It's not about what you say, it's about what you do and how you stand to differentiate yourself from the world. Okay, so as we have read, not by bread alone you shall live, right? This is the law of the manna, right? The provision, right? And what we just read, it says the main point of this chapter, right, was verse 17, because it provides a future Israel in Canaan, and Elohim is giving an example of them basking on the self congratulations, and so Elohim uses his reconciliation by remembering them, who has guided them the last 40 years in the wilderness, who has provided for them, right? And in him establishing his point of protection, corrects and destroys the vanity of them ever thinking that they have been there for their own righteousness, right? And so we're not going to read chapter 9 through 10, but it states that it's the warning of the broken tablets, right? So here Elohim, or Moses, is reminding the people of Israel of the situation they encountered when Moses was in the mountain, right? And so Elohim was giving him the structure, the legal document, right? And establishing his Caesarean and Basel treaty. And he says to Moses that the people have gone astray, right? And when Moses goes to see, they had built a golden calf, right? And they were worshiping that golden calf, and they had broken the commandments. But Moses had not yet revealed the covenant to the people yet, right? The stipulation, the legal stipulation, he had not revealed it to the people, and he had broken them on his way down. And so it's interesting because Moses says, and let's look for it. Give me 1 second. Moses says the following. Now at the end of 40 days and 40 nights, Adonai gave me the 2 tablets of stone, the tablets of the covenant. Right? Adonai said to me, get up, go quickly down from here, for your people whom you brought out of Egypt have acted corruptly. Right? And he says they have quickly turned away from what I have commanded them, and they have made molten images for themselves. Furthermore, Adonai spoke to me, saying, I have seen these people, and it's indeed a stiff-necked people. Right? So they were stuck in their old ways, and they were not willing to obey. And he says, leave me alone so that I might destroy them and blot their name from under heaven. Then I will make you into the nation mightier than, greater than they. Right? So this is Elohim saying, I'm just going to destroy these people and make a nation with you. And Moses pleads for the people. Right? And he reminds them that he had pleaded them for them, and he had protected them. Right? And so he says, then I fell down before Adonai like the first time. And then he says, for 40 days and 40 nights. And I did not eat bread or drink water because all of your sins that you committed, doing evil in Adonai's sight, provoking him to anger. For I was afraid of the fierce wrath and fury which Adonai bore towards you to destroy you. But Adonai listened to me at that time also. So it's interesting because Moses said that he fasted, right, in the desert for 40 days and 40 nights to plead, right, in a sense of, if you want to say, in a sense of mourn, right? He wanted Elohim to listen to him and consider his voice. And it's interesting because Yeshua himself, after being baptized, right, and being recognized as the Son of Elohim in a covenantal language, right, father and son, vassal and Caesarean, right, God being the Caesarean and Yeshua being the vassal. He goes into the desert and he fasts for 40 days and 40 nights. He doesn't eat or drink. And by him lasting those 40 days and 40 nights, he connects with Moses in his willingness to put himself through that so that he can connect with Elohim, and Elohim be willing to listen to his words and his plead for us, right? So that we can be redeemed, so that we can be part of the covenant, right? And so I found it very interesting and beautiful that our Messiah was willing to intercede for us in many ways. And so Yeshua has given us access to this covenantal treaty, right? The Caesarean Vassal Treaty, right? The order of God is based on He will protect us and guide us and direct us as long as we're willing to listen to Him, right? If we really want God to bless us, to protect us, we have to understand that we have to listen to Him, right? The structure of Deuteronomy is based on that. It's a refresher of the Vassal and Caesarean Treaty between us and God, right? So when I told you in the beginning of the study to reflect on what you want and how you want to establish yourself in the world, are you going to obey Elohim, or are you going to keep go astray like the world does, right? And so I'm going to close out with this, because we have to go back to something, right? It says that Proverbs chapter 1 verse 7 says, the fear of Adonai is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and discipline, right? Where is the wisdom? The wisdom is given last week in Deuteronomy chapter 4 verse 5 through 6. It says, see, just as Adonai my God had commanded me, this is Moses, I have taught you statutes and ordinances to do in the land that you are about to enter and possess. You must keep and do them, for it is your wisdom and understanding in the eyes of the peoples, who will hear all these statutes and say, surely this great nation is a wise and understanding people. So my young youth of Casa Israel Yara, and anybody that is willing to listen, understand something. I, Alexander, have chosen to obey my Father. I have chosen to obey God. I have chosen to represent Him correctly. And I tell you the following. I will teach you the statutes and I will teach you the ordinances. Please, young people, do them in the world that you are about to possess, right? Do it in the world and keep them, because they're your understanding. And it is going to be your wisdom in front of the world, right? Understanding that you are in a covenant, in a legal agreement, in a true relationship with God, means that you hold yourself to Him and to obey to Him, and you will represent Him in the world correctly. I please ask you, as your leader, be willing to listen, be willing to keep and do the Father's covenantal structure and legal aspect of this book. It might sound very, how do you say that, detailed or strange for me to tell you, but please, your wisdom and your understanding is based on the Father's commandments. And I will teach you the statutes and ordinances so you can be wise in the world, right? So you can be just, so you can do righteousness, right? And so that you can represent God correctly in the world, right? Yeshua says we cannot serve two masters. We cannot serve the world and God, because we will hate one and love the other. My question is, who would you serve? Right? Me and my house will serve Elohim, Adonai, Yod He Vav He. And I will teach you that as long as you obey Yod He Vav He and you serve Him, He will give you the world. But you have to be obedient and you have to be willing to listen. So, please, obey my Father's commandments and stay true to your covenant and to the legal treaty that is the Torah and the biblical narrative. Thanks for watching. Shavua Tov, Shabbat Shalom, and thank you.